There's a strange contradiction in how millennials are often described. They are the generation associated with job hopping, burnout, delayed milestones, financial anxiety, and a constant sense that stability is harder to reach than it used to be. And somehow, they are also one of the generations most drawn to starting something of their own: a business, a channel, a shop, a service, a freelance practice, a side project that slowly becomes more serious than expected. From the outside, that can seem contradictory. If a generation feels financially unstable, why would entrepreneurship be so appealing? Why would people with student debt, rising rent, and uncertain careers choose something as risky as building their own thing? But that question assumes entrepreneurship only looks risky from the outside. For a lot of millennials, the traditional path already felt risky. The job could disappear, the company could restructure, the promotion could never come, the paycheck could arrive every 2 weeks and still not be enough. So the appeal of entrepreneurship was not always the fantasy of becoming rich, it was the possibility of having more control. And for millennials, control started to feel a lot like freedom. Not total freedom, not escape from work, not some clean exit from pressure, stress, or responsibility, but the freedom of not having every part of your life depend on one system, one employer, one institution, or one decision made by someone else. That is the paradox. Millennials did not become entrepreneurial despite instability. Many became entrepreneurial because of it. Picture the scene. A millennial finishes work and opens the laptop again. Not for the job they were just doing, for the thing they are trying to build after the job is over. Maybe it is a small online store. Maybe it is a freelance service. Maybe it is a newsletter, a design project, a consulting offer, a YouTube channel, a template shop, or something that does not yet have a clean name. At first, it barely feels real. A few late nights, a few invoices, a few posts, a website that is mostly finished, a logo they keep adjusting, a spreadsheet that tells them the numbers are not impressive yet, but they are also not nothing. And what started as a side thing begins to occupy a different place in their mind. Not just a hobby, not quite a business, but a possibility. Something that belongs to them. Something that could grow. Something that makes the future feel slightly less dependent on permission. Millennials have developed a reputation for being entrepreneurial, a generation of freelancers, founders, creators, consultants, Etsy sellers, Shopify builders, newsletter writers, gig workers, and people with at least one idea they are thinking about turning into something. From the outside, the easy explanation feels familiar. They were raised on startup mythology: Steve Jobs in the black turtleneck, Mark Zuckerberg in the hoodie. The garage, the dorm room, the pitch deck, the idea that one person with a laptop could change everything. They were told to follow their passion. They were told to build a personal brand. They were told that being your own boss was the highest form of work. And there is some truth to that. Millennials did absorb a lot of entrepreneurial mythology. They came of age during a period when startups were glamorized, creators became businesses, and independence was sold as a lifestyle. But like most simple explanations, it only captures part of what is happening, because the deeper story is not just inspiration, it is adaptation. Force 1. Loyalty stopped feeling safe. For a long time, the traditional deal around work was fairly clear. You gave a company your time, your effort, your loyalty, and in exchange, the company gave you stability, advancement, benefits, and a future. That deal was never perfect. It was never equally available to everyone, but it was strong enough to shape what people expected from work. Millennials entered adulthood as the deal was weakening. They saw layoffs happen after years of service. They saw companies talk about family while making decisions like spreadsheets. They saw wages lag behind costs. They saw benefits become more conditional, and career ladders turn into something less like ladders and more like a series of unstable platforms. So the old question changed. It was no longer just, how do I succeed inside this system? It became, how much of my life should depend on this system? That is where entrepreneurship starts to look different. Not safe exactly, but rational. If loyalty does not guarantee protection, and stability is not guaranteed by employment, then building something of your own can feel less like a reckless leap and more like a way to diversify risk. The business may fail, the side project may stay small, the freelance work may be inconsistent, but at least it is another point of control, another source of possibility, another way to avoid having the entire future tied to one company's decision. Force 2. The tools for independence became normal. Millennials also came of age at the exact moment when the infrastructure for small independent enterprise became easier to access. You did not need a storefront to sell something. You needed a platform. You did not need a publisher to build an audience. You needed a feed, a camera, a newsletter, or a channel. You did not need a large office to start a service business. You needed a laptop, a payment processor, a website, and enough people willing to trust you. This changed the psychology of entrepreneurship. Starting something no longer always looked like opening a physical business, signing a long lease, hiring employees, and taking on massive upfront risk. Sometimes it looked like testing an offer, posting a product, taking one client, building a landing page, uploading one video, and seeing what happens. The gig economy played a major role in this shift. So did platforms like Etsy, Shopify, Substack, YouTube, Patreon, Fiverr, Upwork, and the broader world of freelancing and creator work. Some of these systems were empowering, some were exploitative. Often, they were both. But together, they normalized the idea that income could come from smaller, more flexible, more personal channels. And for millennials, that mattered. Because the tools arrived at the same time, the old path felt less reliable. The internet did not make entrepreneurship easy, but it made trying feel more possible. And sometimes that is enough to change a generation's behavior. Force 3. Ownership became identity. There is also an emotional piece here. Millennials are often described as people who want work to mean something. That can be overstated, but it is not completely wrong. For a generation that grew up watching traditional job titles become less stable, identity often moves somewhere else. Not just where you work, but what you are building, what you care about, what you make, what you can point to and say, this is mine. That matters because employment often asks people to disappear into someone else's brand. You use your skills, your taste, your energy, and your attention to build value under a name that is not yours. And for many millennials, that bargain became harder to accept as the only model. Entrepreneurship offered a different feeling. A small business, a channel, a shop, a service, or a creative project could become a place where the person's own judgment actually mattered. Their voice, their taste, their decisions, their standards. Not always perfectly, not without customers, algorithms, clients, or market pressure, but still, there was a sense of authorship, a sense that the work reflected something personal. And that sense of ownership can feel like freedom, not because it removes effort. In many cases, it creates more effort, but because the effort feels connected to something the person can claim. The millennial entrepreneur is often not just asking, how do I make money? They're asking, how do I build something where my work does not entirely disappear into someone else's system? Force 4. 2008 changed the risk calculation. There is also a historical reason this pattern makes sense. For many millennials, the 2008 financial crisis was not just an economic event, it was a formative lesson. They watched the people and institutions that were supposed to understand the system fail to protect ordinary people from its collapse. They watched jobs disappear. They watched homes lose value. They watched older workers delay retirement. Younger workers struggle to enter the labor market. And entire career timelines shift before they had fully begun. The message was not subtle. Traditional employment could evaporate. Safe industries were not always safe. The people who followed the rules were not always protected from the consequences of decisions made far above them. That changes how risk feels. Entrepreneurship had always been described as risky, but after 2008, many millennials started to see traditional employment as risky too. Maybe a business could fail, but a job could also vanish. Maybe a side hustle was uncertain, but so was waiting for a company to reward loyalty. Maybe building something of your own was stressful, but so was depending entirely on systems that had already shown they could break. This did not make every millennial a founder, but it changed the emotional math. Entrepreneurship stopped looking like the opposite of stability. For some people, it started looking like the only way to create any stability at all. And this is where the honest part comes in. Not all millennial entrepreneurship is visionary. Some of it is survival rebranded as ambition. Some people did not start a side hustle because they had a dream. They started because rent went up, because wages were not enough, because the job did not offer benefits, because one income stream felt too fragile, because the responsible thing no longer felt like enough. And that matters because the language around entrepreneurship can make pressure sound glamorous. Hustle culture turned exhaustion into a personal brand. It made overwork look inspiring. It turned economic insecurity into a motivational quote. And for millennials, that created a strange emotional trap. The freedom was real, but so was the precarity. The flexibility was real, but so was the lack of a safety net. The independence was real, but so were the unpaid hours, inconsistent income, no guaranteed benefits, and the quiet fear that if you stop moving, everything stops with you. So it would be too simple to say millennials became entrepreneurs because they are unusually ambitious. Some are, but many are also unusually aware that the old systems do not guarantee the outcomes they once promised. That awareness can produce creativity, it can produce resilience, it can produce independence, but it can also produce exhaustion because building your own thing means you are not only the worker, you are also the manager, the marketer, the accountant, the strategist, the customer service department, and the person trying to convince yourself that this still makes sense. And yet, the appeal remains because even a difficult kind of control can feel better than no control. Even a small project can feel like an exit route. Even a business that has not fully worked yet can change how the future feels. It says, maybe I am not only waiting to be chosen. Maybe I can build something that chooses me back. And this is the deeper pattern. The millennial entrepreneur is not always chasing wealth. Often, they are chasing control. Control over time, control over income, control over identity, control over the feeling that one employer, one institution, or one unstable system does not get to define the entire shape of their life. And for a generation that watched stability become conditional, control started to feel like freedom. Not perfect freedom, not freedom from work, pressure, risk, or uncertainty, but freedom from total dependence, freedom from waiting forever for permission, freedom from having every future possibility tied to someone else's ladder. That is why entrepreneurship became so compelling. Not because every millennial wants to be a CEO, not because everyone wants to scale, pitch, disrupt, or build the next big thing, but because building something of your own can feel like a way to reclaim a piece of the future. A future that does not depend entirely on being promoted, or being retained, or being approved, or being lucky enough for the old path to work the way it was supposed to. Millennials became entrepreneurial because the world made ownership feel emotionally necessary. A side hustle became a backup plan. A backup plan became an identity. An identity became a version of freedom. And somewhere after work, a millennial opens the laptop again, tired, uncertain, maybe not even sure the thing will work, but still building. Not because it is easy, not because it is guaranteed, but because, for once, at least part of the future feels like something they get to touch.